President, fellow delegates, we stand today at the threshold of a great event, both in the life of the United Nations and in the life of mankind. This Universal Declaration of Human Rights may well become the international Magna Carta of all men everywhere.
In 1948, the United Nations Human Rights Commission successfully drafted and adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This success was accomplished through Eleanor Roosevelt's diplomatic efforts by leading the delegates to respectfully debate and come to agreement on fundamental human rights. Today, the Declaration is one of the world's most influential documents on human rights. After the devastations of World War II, including the Holocaust, many people were convinced that human rights and fundamental freedoms generally were matters with which the world must be concerned if international peace was to be achieved. Plans for peace began before the war ended. The Allied leaders, Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin, began discussing a plan for a worldwide organization to succeed Woodrow Wilson's failed League of Nations. The United Nations was founded in June 1945. The Charter states that, "We the peoples of the United Nations are determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, to unite our strength to maintain peace and security, to promote the economic, social advancement of all peoples, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights." Eleanor Roosevelt had already won international respect and admiration as a political activist, social reformer, and as First Lady, as the wife of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. After her husband's death in 1945, she accepted an offer from President Truman to become a delegate to the United Nations. At the age of 65, she was the only woman on the U.S. delegation. She swiftly gained respect for her contribution and was elected to the chair of the newly formed Commission on Human Rights. Now with Eleanor Roosevelt as the chair, the commission was charged with preparing an international Bill of Rights. The first major debate was over what type of document should be made. Certain nations preferred a legally binding document called a covenant, which is similar to a treaty that would require nations to ratify and implement human rights. Other nations wanted just a declaration that would clearly define basic human rights but would not be legally binding. A compromise was reached. The committee decided to proceed with drafting 3 separate documents at the same time: a declaration, a covenant, and measures of implementation. Another major debate was over what type of rights to include. Some countries valued political and civil rights, while others wanted economic, social, and cultural rights.
Part of what's happening is that it's being drafted at the same time the Cold War is starting. And there are Americans on the commission. Most famously, Eleanor Roosevelt is the chair of the commission. But there also are Soviet or Russian delegates and people from countries controlled or influenced by the Soviet Union. So there were kind of the same debates you would have in the Cold War. You know, from the United States perspective, basic human rights are things like rights to free elections and rights to free speech and freedom of religion. But from the Soviet point of view, the communist point of view, rights includes things like rights to health care and rights to a job. And so there's a basic debate about, are human rights political rights or are they economic and social rights? And if you read the Universal Declaration, you'll see that all of that is there.
Eleanor Roosevelt used her own diplomatic style and methods to lead the drafting committee. First, she respected her fellow committee members. She said, "To get along well with someone, you need to understand their point of view and find areas of agreement." Next, she created a safe and informal atmosphere for the delegates to discuss their differing points of view on human rights. She said, "I remember on one occasion thinking our work might be helped by an informal atmosphere." Frequently, she gathered delegates outside of the committee meetings. Finally, she kept the delegates focused with a demanding schedule to complete this important task. After thousands of votes and hundreds of meetings, in 1948 the Declaration was completed. Drawing from previous human rights documents like the British Magna Carta, the French Rights of Man, and the American Bill of Rights, the Finnish Declaration begins with a preamble that explains the reasons for the adoption. These are followed by a proclamation which encourages all peoples and nations to keep, educate, and promote the stated rights and freedoms. Then come 30 articles that specify human rights. On December 10th, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was accepted by the United Nations General Assembly. Many, including Eleanor Roosevelt, considered it her greatest achievement.
And children all over the world, many miles from Paris and New York, will turn for hope and guidance and inspiration to this document. And it's particularly fitting that here tonight should be the person who's been the leader in this movement, assisted though she has been by many others, the person who has raised to even greater honor so great a name. I refer, of course, to Mrs. Roosevelt, the delegate of the United States.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has proven to be an influential document since its adoption. It is viewed as the standard of achievement for human rights. As was decided in the initial debates, the International Bill of Human Rights was started with the UDHR and later followed with 2 legally binding covenants. Within the UN, the Declaration has inspired further human rights codes, treaties, and measures, such as the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Yet, its significance has reached beyond the UN. Since 1948, the Declaration has served as a model for the human rights provisions of 90 countries' constitutions. It provided human rights standards for the 1955 Freedom Charter of South Africa and the 1975 Helsinki Accords.
Well, I think there were a number of successes. It was very successful as far as sort of a benchmark of civilized conduct around the world. It became a part, arguably, of the customary international law, meaning that the countries and governments around the world follow the values and principles of the Declaration because of their legal obligation. It also became the foundation of international human rights law. Prior to this document, there was no human rights document internationally.
Finally, it is the cornerstone of the modern human rights movement. It has inspired many individuals like Nelson Mandela in leading South Africa to end apartheid. Also, it has been the foundation for hundreds of human rights organizations, like Amnesty International, which was created in 1961, whose vision is for every person to enjoy all the rights in the UDHR. However, the major failure of the Declaration is in education. The proclamation of the document states, "The job of the individual nations is to teach, educate, and promote respect for the rights and freedoms." Yet, according to a 1997 survey, most people do not know about the Declaration and their entitled rights. Although the Declaration is an ideal of treatment, words on paper cannot ensure that these rights are respected, because the document has no binding force of its own. For example, the United States did not give civil rights to African Americans until the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was in violation of Article 2, providing rights and freedoms without discrimination of any kind, such as race or color. Currently, Amnesty International has a campaign to the U.S. government for violating the human rights of suspected terrorists detained at Guantanamo Bay, citing Article 5, freedom from torture, and Article 10, the right to fair and public hearings. Much work is still needed. Yet, the Declaration is a standard of human rights to which all peoples and nations can aspire. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a milestone document in the history of human rights. In 1948, the United Nations Human Rights Commission successfully drafted and adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This success was accomplished through Eleanor Roosevelt's diplomatic efforts in urging delegates to respectfully debate their differences into agreements. Consequently, the Declaration's influence continues as the first international proclamation of human rights to which all people are entitled. It has inspired constitutions, international law, individuals, organizations, and close to 200 codes, treaties, and measures. Today, the future of human rights is in every person's hands. As Eleanor Roosevelt said, quote, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere."